Welcome back, Aces fans. I'm Las Vegas Aces President Nikki Fargas, and today we're excited to debut a brand new segment on In the Paint called Top of the Key. Top of the Key will explore some of the great debates throughout the WNBA season, as well as delve into a little bit of Aces history from time to time. And we will do it with a series of guests led primarily by our television color and play-by-play announcers, Carolyn, Peck, and Krista Blunt. Joining me for our inaugural voyage today is Carolyn Peck. Carolyn, thank you for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. I can't wait for the season to get started.
Well, the 2024 season is right around the corner, and we've got a lot of movement during this offseason through free agency and trades, and of course the draft. So today, let's talk about some of that roster movement. Which teams do you think helped themselves the most during the free agency period?
Well, Nikki, let's go back 2 years ago. The Las Vegas Aces, they won the championship. And so every GM should have been looking at that roster and looking at what Vegas did and said, what do we need to improve on? The only team that really did that was New York with the movement that they made, bringing in Brianna Stewart, Jonquel Jones, Courtney Vandersloot. But what did the Aces do last year? Well, they followed that up with back-to-back. So I think there were 3 teams that made major moves that are catching on to a little bit of the secret, and one of those was Seattle.
Well, when you look at Seattle, right, you have Jewel Lloyd, who pretty much carried the team. And so we always talk about you've got to have player number 1, player number 2, player number 3. Who's player number 2 and 3 for Seattle that they added during free agency?
I think one of the big things that they were missing was having a point guard.
Yes.
And who's back? Skylar Diggins-Smith. I think she's one of the best point guards in the league. So you put her next to Jewel Lloyd, and then they got an anchor in the paint, an MVP in Nneka Ogwumike, and having that experience on the floor to be the support or the and others for Seattle for Jewel Lloyd, I think that's going to be huge.
And then we need to talk about Phoenix. Obviously, Brittany Griner, one of the greatest players to play this game, along with Diana Taurasi. What did they do to add to their roster as well?
A vital part of any roster is a point guard. You know who they got? They got a dog in Natasha Cloud coming over from Washington. She'll bring that competitive edge. She'll be able to get the ball to BG and also to Diana Taurasi. Who else could she pass to? Kalia Copper. KFC, let me tell you, she lit it up in Chicago. Now she's out in Phoenix. And another shooter they added was Rebecca Allen.
Well, Rebecca Allen is one of those players that also can play the 4, the 3, and stretch them offensively. So I like what Phoenix has been able to do. But then let's move to Atlanta. Atlanta also had some big movements as well.
Well, we talked about Skylar Diggins-Smith going to Seattle. She didn't play last year. Neither did Tina Charles. This is another MVP, an anchor in the paint. Can you imagine having Tina Charles with Ryan Howard and Alicia Gray, and they got a point guard in having Jordan Canada coming over from the LA Sparks who can push the pace. They already play in tempo, so they've got a big 3 in Atlanta as well.
Well, as we move past the free agency, obviously this was one of the most anticipated and most watched draft in the history. And the player that everybody was watching to see, and we all knew she was going to go number 1, was Caitlin Clark. So when you talk about the draft, we obviously talk about Caitlin Clark in Indiana.
Well, you got to talk about Lynn Dunn, because Lynn Dunn over the last 3 drafts really has been able to bring them in. She had, 3-4 first-round draft picks 2 years ago. Last year, she had 2 draft picks getting Aaliyah Boston. And now this year, they only had 1 pick, but that was the only one that they needed. And having a player like Caitlin Clark, we saw her in college shoot those logo 3s, but I think an underestimated talent that Caitlin Clark has is her passing ability. And in the WNBA, it's a ball screen kind of league. And when you have Caitlin Clark and you've got the option of Aaliyah Boston or a Nalissa Smith, look, Indiana is knocking at the door on a playoff berth.
Well, we saw during their collegiate career, we had the Iowa versus LSU, the Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese. And so when you look at Angel Reese, obviously she's one of the best players coming out of college. And then you add Camila Cardoso to Chicago's roster. How good are they going to be?
Let me tell you, I don't understand how LA had the number 2 draft and you passed on 6'7" Camila Cardoso. I understand you wanted Cameron Brink in LA, but golly, you cannot teach height. And Camila Cardoso at 6'7", and then bringing in Angel Reese. rebounding is going to be at a premium in Chicago for Teresa Weatherspoon.
And I love the athleticism that those two bring, because when you look at 6'7" and Cardoso, her ability to run the floor is really impressive. And then Angel Reese has been just a walking double-double. And then you mentioned Cameron Brink, so we've got to talk a little bit too about LA and what they were able to do in the draft as well.
I think one of the most valuable players in the draft was Cameron Brink, because she's like a unicorn. You know, Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, long, can block shots. She can also shoot the three. Talk about running the floor. And then Rickea Jackson out of Tennessee. Rickea Jackson is, I think, the premium position in the WNBA. That stretch 3-4, she can play at the 4, open up the paint for Cameron Brink, or she can play and also defend the 3. So I think those are some rookies that are going to make a major impact this season.
Well, as we wrap up and talk about everybody else, we need to talk about the Aces before we end here. And let's just talk about what the Aces were able to do this year during free agency as well, and with their draft picks.
Well, when you talk about free agency, getting Megan Gustafson, that's huge. And in watching her improvement since she's come into the league, this is a post player, number one, that is about 6'5". She's got great length. She runs the floor. She's got unstoppable energy. And she also has the ability to stretch the floor and shoot the 3. Can you imagine what A'ja Wilson is going to be able to get done in the paint?
Well, I can imagine, because A'ja Wilson, look what she's already been able to do in the paint.
And still doing. And a rookie that they drafted this season, Kate Martin, is the one that I'm watching to see, because she was like a coach on the floor at Iowa, and in watching her in practice with the Aces, she's smart. And that's one of the things that the veterans respect most, is if you know the game and she can put the ball in the hole.
Well, Kate Martin obviously is one of those players that also understands her role. And she's someone who's played with a great player in Caitlin Clark. So her ability to play with the great players that we have, the A'ja Wilson, the Jackie Youngs, the Chelsea Grays of the world, I think she would fit very well into Becky Hammon's system. Well, Carolyn, thank you for joining us today. Your insight, your knowledge, just your passion for the game and growing the game. We can't say enough how much we appreciate you.
Oh, I can't wait for this season to get started.